everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the third edition of Reimagining the World Together, How Friendship Matters for Our Future. I'm Suzanne Shanahan here at the Kenan Institute for Ethics. This series brings together wildly different friends and colleagues, usually often unlikely duos, to share how their relationship has shaped their lives, their work, and their commitments. Reimagining the World Together is part of the Purpose Project here at Duke, a collaboration between Duke Divinity, the Office of Undergraduate Education, and the Kenan Institute for Ethics. It is funded by the Duke Endowment. The Purpose Project seeks to make explorations of character and questions of purpose signature features of the Duke experience and of the Duke community. Thus far, we have introduced you to a wildly different sets of friends, people who've been brought together by the very differences that should have kept them apart, people connected by serendipity or by shared vocation or shared pastimes. But in each conversation, we get a strangely intimate window into what makes friendships work, as well as how friendships make the otherwise impossible possible. They're very different examples of how friends enable the extraordinary in each other. But they're also about the prosaic, everyday things that connect people everywhere. The death of a parent, being dumped by a partner, the love of show tunes. They remind us that the hard and the happy often go together. People have been asking after each one if I have a favorite, and thus far I do not. In fact, what I've loved most about these is how very different the conversations have been, each compelling and challenging in distinctive ways. I love how the friendships provide acceptance, give courage, enable accountability. I love that they illustrate how friendship can help us reconcile with the past and reimagine our future. And thus, for me, each of them offer a really different kind of insight, something I can take away into my own relationships. In last week's conversation, for example, with Paul Farmer and Todd McCormick, we heard how the friendship of two college buddies dumped on the same day by their girlfriends at Duke forged a shared and interesting commitment to eradicating health inequalities that has quite literally changed the face of healthcare globally. In that conversation, what I was most taken with was how that friendship both opened the world to each other and also provided refuge from that very world. This week, we are thrilled to present our fourth pair and first married couple, the fabulous duo and authors of the best-selling Genius of Dogs and the more recent Survival of the Friendliest, Vanessa Woods and Brian Hare. This conversation will be moderated by Mike Tomasello, professor of psychology here at Duke, who, amongst his many other claims to fame, was Brian's undergraduate mentor and is close friends with both Vanessa and Brian. Vanessa is a research scientist here at Duke, where she also directs Puppy Kindergarten, a longitudinal study on different rearing strategies for assistant dogs. She is also author of several children's books about space and bedbugs. She's married to Brian, with whom in 2005, barely knowing him, she not only agreed to marry him, but ran off to the war-torn DRC to join him on a research trip in a bonobo sanctuary. So clearly, in this case, friendship equals courage. Brian, best known both on and off campus as the dog guy, is a professor of evolutionary anthropology here at Duke, who founded the Duke Canine Cognition Center to study dog psychology over a decade ago. In his latest venture with Vanessa, they pulled together their research on dogs, foxes, chimps, bonobos, and various other creatures to argue that the key to our success as a species is that we have evolved to be friendly, but the same mechanisms that make us prone to friendliness also are the cause of our penchant for both aggression and violence. A super brief logistical note before I duck off. Should there be technological challenges, we're in the middle of a rainstorm, have no fear, there are several people behind the scenes working to fix it swiftly. Also, at about 6:10, we're gonna open up for questions Please submit your questions via the Q&A. They will be passed on to Mike to share with Vanessa and Brian. And with that, I'm going to hop off and welcome you to enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, hi guys. This is about friendship, and I think you guys got more friendship connections. We got more friendship connections here than pretty much any of the other pairs we've seen. So as Suzanne said, you guys are not only friends, but a married couple and working colleagues. And of course, we've been longtime friends. I've known Brian since he was an undergraduate and whatnot. So, and our kids are friends. So it's friendship all around, friendship everywhere. Yeah, so my role, as I understand it, is really just to facilitate you guys talking about things. And so I have a few conversation starters or whatnot. So maybe I'll just start by, Suzanne said a few suggestive things about the beginning of your relationship, but just tell me, Vanessa, how did you all meet? How did it all start?
Well, I just want to first say thank you, Mike, for being here. I feel like we should make you a co-author at this stage. And please feel free to correct Brian on any mistakes he makes. Actually, I think it'd be more fun if maybe the two of you just started to argue. I think that'd be much more entertaining. But since you asked, where did we meet? We met in Uganda, and then I was filming for the Disney Channel on Ngamba Island, which is where the chimpanzees were. And then Mike had just moved to Germany with you, and you hadn't got the grant yet. Right, but you were just going in there figuring out if you could do.
Mike saved my life.
Yeah, you were sleeping on the floor.
Yeah,
on the floor.
I had just finished my PhD, and
with Mike,
and I had all these great plans of how I was going to go out of the nest and be on my own, and it didn't work out. And Mike was like, "Okay, I'll save you," and so he saved my life. And so, and then he gave me this great chance to fly to Uganda to start a new research endeavor, and he paid my way and made it all possible, and there was Vanessa Woods.
Yes, and I'm not sure if the rain is too loud. Mike, you're the technical one of the three of us, so just let us know if you can't hear us.
No.
So yeah, and then what happened? 3 days. We were together for 3 days, and then I went back to Australia, and then Brian went back to his sleeping on the floor in Germany, where you brought him, Mike, to an apartment with no furniture.
I remember that, yes.
And then I think you told him he had like 10 days to write a grant for like $1 million. Is that right too? And then Brian didn't sleep. Like that was before you came, right?
Yeah.
We met, and he hadn't slept for 10 days thanks to you. And then we went our separate ways. And Brian, I think I emailed you, and I was like, "Hey, had a really great time." And then Brian's like, "Well, why don't you come over to Germany and visit me over there?" And then I met.
But the saving grace was the calling card.
Oh,
because nobody anymore remembers calling cards.
Students, let me tell you what long distance was like back in the early 2000s. So there was none of this. You can't see anybody's faces. Like this is like the future for us. Like I had a dial phone. Do you guys even know what that is? Like I wish I had a picture. This basically didn't exist. You had to dial. You had to pick up a handle and dial. Oh wait, has Mike got one? No, he doesn't got another one. You had to pick up the handle and dial the numbers, and you had a calling card that was like 20 numbers long. And if you made a mistake, you had to hang up and start again. But it was the cheapest way to call internationally, because now it's free. But before then, it was like $1 a minute. So if we wanted to have like a conversation for, and we were both so broke. And but you dial the 20 numbers, then you have to dial another 10 numbers because that's your PIN number. Then you got to talk for 3 cents a minute.
No, the key thing was my sister worked for the Australian telephone company at the time.
That's what she knew.
And she called me one day. I said, I'm really smitten with this young lady, but how am I ever going to talk to her? Like, it's never going to work out. And she said, well, I know about this calling card that is a penny a minute. It only costs a penny a minute. And that's how our relationship survived.
Yeah.
And we became really good friends
Via telephone.
because for months and months, our relationship was just talking on the phone. There was nothing else.
Hours.
So we
hours.
became big buddies.
Yeah. and then Brian flew me over to Germany because I was so poor I couldn't afford it. And I met Mike before I met his parents. And I was more nervous to meet Mike than I was to meet his parents. I don't know if you remember, Mike, it was at the zoo. It was at the Leipzig Zoo. And then Brian was like, okay, like, it's your time to shine. And I was like, hi, Mike. Like, heard so much about you. And you were just watching the chimpanzees. You're just watching chimpanzees. You're like, hey. And then that's when it started. What was that, like, how many years ago? What's 2020 minus 2004?
Okay. I think that's
16 years ago.
Yeah. Great. Wow. I didn't know the whole story. I knew something like that, but I didn't know the whole
Good first question, Mike. That really opened it up.
Okay. Yeah, and how was it in Leipzig?
The weather is beautiful. Doesn't it rains all the time? Brian, what would you like to say about Germany?
I can't say anything. Manna from heaven. It was, from a research perspective, there's no better place in terms of the resources and that kind of thing.
When did you all get married during that?
2006. So it was like a year and a half, but we'd only like been face to face for like 3 weeks before Brian asked me to marry him. 3 weeks and like so many calling cards. Like a recycling tip full of calling cards.
Yeah. I bugged off to Australia one time for a couple of weeks and then asked her to marry me, and that was pretty much it. And then she moved to Germany.
Yeah, and I'm like, what am I gonna do in Germany? And Brian's like, don't worry, we'll find you a job. And then that was it. Like
we started working together. Yeah.
He didn't say at that time, you can be my research assistant and basically do all the work in Congo,
Okay, so let's talk about working together and how is that?
Amazing.
Vanessa, what you just said a minute ago reminded me of the story when you all first went to the bonobos and they didn't like males, right?
It was the strangest thing. And Brian, who with you had worked for like so many years with chimpanzees, and we were working at a chimpanzee sanctuary too. And Brian's was like every chimpanzee's best friend. Like they love him. He's like the camp counselor. He's like the little league coach. He just has this magical way about him with chimpanzees. But the bonobos, we don't know why. Like maybe because the females are in charge there, like they're the dominant individuals. They just would not go near him. And so I'm not sure what the agreement was beforehand, but pretty soon it was like, babe, I need your help. Like, and then all of a sudden I was doing science in a way that, I wasn't used to at all. I mean, he learned from you, Mike, so it's really serious and rigorous, and it's like, well, you got to move the porcupine this way this time. And it's like, and the other thing was that Brian doesn't speak French, so I was doing all the communicating, and Brian's like, you moved the porcupine the wrong way.
No, you gotta move the porcupine the right way.
Yeah. Trial 1, trial 2.
Trial 1, trial 2.
Up to 20.
But was that the first time you started actually really doing the science, doing part of the science?
That was the first time I'd done experimental science. So I'd done ecological studies before. Like I was used to watching the animals. Like I'd been in Costa Rica with capuchin monkeys. I'd been in Uganda doing like a chimpanzee census. So I was used to like observing the animals, counting the animals, like looking at what they did. I'd never really done any kind of science where you had to interact with animals. And that's the fun thing about it, because, you know, I think it was like Franz de Waal said, it's like you can't understand how an animal thinks just by watching them run around, you know, in nature. Like you gotta, it's like with kids, you can't understand what they know by watching them run around a playground. You gotta sit them down and give them a test. And that's what you guys do. You sit down the chimpanzee or the bonobo, and give them a test.
All right, so this is where you get to see how this works, our relationship, because she has told a great story. It was an amazing story, but there was a major error in the story.
She's not a scientist, you know.
I know, but this is how it works. Okay, so I could never tell a story that interesting or that good, but I don't think it was Franz that ever said that. Franz would actually tell you to just observe.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Was it you, Mike?
It would be Mike that would say,
did you say that?
to interact and learn from the interaction. Yeah.
The experiments, yes.
Yeah.
Experiment.
Yeah.
Wait, I see Suzanne coming back. Oh no, she's
Okay, that was just a blip. Okay. What's your side of that story, Brian? I'm just curious.
I don't really have a side other than to say that thank goodness Vanessa thought it would be exciting to hang out. I basically went with the whole baby bonobo thing. Like, oh, there are lots of baby bonobos, and she had raised a baby chimpanzee at Ngamba Island. And, you know, DRC, if you've never been there, and I actually had never been there either.
That's the Democratic Republic of Congo, yes?
Yeah, that can be a hard sell. And so, you know, I showed her some baby bonobos and videos of them, and she was like, all right, I'm in, let's do it. This is gonna be really exciting. And actually the woman who introduced us, Debbie Cox, works at all these different sanctuaries in Africa for these orphan apes that we, you know, we met at one, and then we worked together at different ones together, because we also went to a chimpanzee sanctuary together, Chimpunga, you know, and while we were still in Leipzig. And Debbie was really sort of like, basically, don't be a wimp. It'll be awesome. Go. And actually, Richard Wrangham went on that first trip with us. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, he met us at the airport in Kinshasa. And so my PhD advisor met us there. And so we actually had a great time. And, you know, but the problem, it is really true what she said, and you'll remember from Leipzig that the bonobos are different, and they're nervous around men. They're not comfortable around men the same way that chimpanzees are. And it really was that I realized, I was like, whoa, these guys are not chimpanzees. And I was really having a hard time testing them. So I had to I came up and I was like, I know you just were here to play with babies. But what do you think about, you know, I don't know, helping me with some science?
really
and
groundbreaking research.
and so there was some begging involved, and she was very kind and helped, and so that's how we made it.
Great. Okay. And then what about since you've been at once you got to Duke? So then we got the puppies, right? So how did that all come to pass, and how does that work?
Well, you know, if you called us 3 weeks from now, we'd have them running around here, because of the situation at the moment we had to move the puppy kindergarten off campus. But that was another one of Brian's ideas.
Well, actually, no. Wait. Technically, okay. So we've been working with dogs. Mike and I have been working with dogs for a long time, and you know, I have to retell this story quite often, but since it's a lot of undergraduates listening, I always think
Mike, why don't you tell the story? I want Mike to tell the story.
Brian's story is much better and mostly true.
I always wanted to hear Mike's version about what you looked like when you came to his office. Please, Mike, please tell the story. Like, what did he look like when Brian turned up?
So Mike, I'll just you can correct my version. Basically, we were trying to understand. I was following Mike's research program of trying to understand what's unique about human psychology, and Mike and many other people, but Mike being a leader in trying to understand language development and the development of human minds got excited about the idea of gestural communication. So the idea that if you follow someone's point, that it means something about how you think about others thinking. And that Mike was looking at chimpanzees, our closest living relative, together with bonobos. And it basically was beginning to identify that it seemed like there was a real difference. That while 9 to 12-month-old children are remarkable at reading and understanding gestural communication in others, before they understand all sorts of other things, they have this early understanding of this thing that is sort of the first window into others' minds. And it's hard not to get amazed and excited about the fact that it's sort of this launching pad for language acquisition and participation in larger culture. Basically, everything that makes you human sort of starts with this very little amazing thing of following the direction someone points. And so learning this, I'm 19 years old or whatever at the time, and he had evidence, and I was even participating in some of the work that chimpanzees couldn't get this. And Mike said to me one day, I think that this is unique to humans. And I thought, oh yeah, unique to humans. And then I was thinking, and then all of a sudden I just sort of said, well, I think my dog does that. And the way I tell the story is that, Mike said something to the effect of, yeah, everybody's dog does calculus. There was a step in there actually where Mike said, well, really? Because I thought when you point, like in the textbooks, it says dog, just look at your finger. I said, no, my childhood best friend was my dog, and I'd play fetch and he'd lose his ball, and you would, point in the direction that the ball had gone, that he couldn't find it. And he would go in that direction you gestured and search in that thing. And so Mike I always tell this story because it still is amazing to me that Mike didn't just shoo me away. I'm 19 years old, I'm an undergraduate. Like, why did he even pay attention for 1 second? But instead, he was like, okay, well, you seem really convinced that this is a thing. Why don't I help you figure out how to do an experiment? And translation, he's like, I will help you prove me wrong. That's amazing if you step back and think about it. That's amazing. And so he tirelessly worked to help me. And it ends up that, dogs had some amazing sophistication. And Mike and I went on to publish papers about how dogs have some abilities that look a lot like human infants. So how we ended up with the dog puppy kindergarten is fast forward 20 years of research. We think that the abilities that dogs have to read social gestures and some other abilities they demonstrate, that they're related to their performance at the different jobs they do. And we've been able to just demonstrate that even as puppies, there may be a link between their ability to follow gestures and their ability to do things like help people with disabilities or find bombs. So the puppy kindergarten is trying to follow Mike's great example, because when Mike wanted to understand language development, it was important to look longitudinally, to resample the same individuals over and over as they mature to better understand how language happens. And so we're sort of trying to follow in the footsteps of great developmental psychologists and say, well, what about dog puppies? How, if we resample how they develop, can that help us refine our prediction of which dogs will be successful in those different jobs?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing like that anywhere. This is unique research program. And Vanessa, how you're sort of running the whole thing, right?
Well, I think it's unique because anyone thinking, oh yeah, let's raise 50 to 100 puppies on campus, just thinks about it for a minute and is like, you know what? Let's not do that. But Brian was convinced that this was something important, and it just seemed to be. I love puppies. Like, I love puppies, love dog puppies. I love babies of all kinds. I love the human babies, the bonobo babies, the chimpanzee babies. So I think Brian knew that because it was puppies, he could get behind this. He's like, you can just cuddle them all day.
Well, people who are connected to you all in any way, email-wise, are getting emails regularly saying it's puppy day, come play with the puppies and stuff, and puppy birthdays and all kinds of
Yes. Yes, they are.
Well, thank you for helping us celebrate them, Mike.
Well, that's a good segue into the book. So you guys, again, this is unique compared to some of the other people who've been in this series, that you all have actually written about friendliness. So.
Oh,
Okay.
you're a true friend.
Really?
And so the people in this class have read either the whole book or most of it. So, so I guess I ask two things. One is about the process of writing it, and let me ask that first, and then we'll come to the content of it. But in the process, let me just seed Brian with a conversation opener here. Vanessa said on an email about it when she says, "Never again," about writing the book together. So
Well, I just interrupt and say that was because you started and finished a book
Three.
in a fraction of the time that we were still writing. Brought it to us at a present. Say, here's my book.
And but I am curious. I mean, I remember I always heard that the best way to lose a friend is to lend them money. But after hearing you, I thought maybe one of the best ways to lose a friend is to write a book with them. So,
Number one.
Tell me about the process of writing the book. Who did what? What were the difficult points? Were you thinking of divorce at any time? How did that go?
So Mike has really set me up here to start. So I would say our book is both of our books we wrote together are a marriage, and I think the audience benefits from the fact that it is a marriage, in that if you enjoy it and reading it, it's despite me. There's no way I could ever write words that would be fun to read. I'm not going to be able to turn broccoli into ice cream the way that Vanessa does. So it really is a marriage. But my role in all of this was, to be a good scientist and to make sure that great storytelling has the backbone of great science. It's, if anybody's ever understood there's a conflict between scientists and science communicators, Mike has been called by a million science communicators or journalists, and it can be, as a scientist, very frustrating because the thing you communicate, they then take a little part of it and you feel like it's not really accurate or whatever. And then they're frustrated because, well, if they were accurate, no one would read it.
Right. And you say all these boring long sentences and they have to put them into something interesting. Yes.
Right. And so instead of that being a phone call that you hang up and, okay, I'm not talking to that guy again. We lived together and
what are we having for dinner?
Yeah, we were writing together. So all I have to say is it's good that humans have the ability for forgiveness, because I would say that was the key to our friendship in writing the book.
What were the hardest parts about it, though? Was it that conflict between trying to do the science part and the
I think so, right?
Putting it in more friendly terms part?
Yeah, I learned a lot about arguing. Walter Sinan Armstrong, our friend, wrote a book. I think he also started and finished it in the time that we took to write ours, and it was called How to Think and Argue. Yeah. And there was a distinction in there that really struck me as like a chimpanzee versus bonobos, because when chimpanzees fight, they fight to win, basically, to establish dominance and maintain control. But when bonobos fight, they really do it to maintain the peace. So just because you fight doesn't mean that, everything's over. There's different kinds of fighting. The hardest thing, I think, was to argue in order to make progress rather than to convince somebody else that you were correct. And I learned an appreciation for the science part of it. Brian's always so sweet talking about how I'm a great writer, but at the very beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, your sentences are so long and boring. Like, no. I'm not going to put every trial you ever did. Every trial that Mike made you do.
And all the extra control conditions, they got to be in there.
Gotta be controls.
So many controls, so many. And then Brian's like, but if you do it that way, then people won't know. I'm like, you know what? They don't care. They do not care. But you know, but I learned that if I could write about science, which is actually about truth, if I could write about that in a way that was compelling, then that was something that was worth something. And it was your work, Mike. It was a theory of mind passage. We were at the pool one day, our kids were playing. I think I was exhausted and complaining, but I was like, Mike, theory of mind, like this was just an example. And this was like, I think it was like year 4 into it or something. And it really made everything click for me because Brian and I had been arguing all afternoon. He's just like, go to the pool with Mike. And I'm like, okay, Mike, Molly wants to see Kiara. Anyway, and I said, Mike, this whole theory of mind thing, like, who cares? Because this is like, you know, for all the students, this is like one of the foundations, like your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs about the thoughts, feeling, beliefs of others. I'm like, come on, Mike, like you point, someone knows that you're pointing, and under there, I'm like, is that it? Is that really the foundation of human experience? Like this theory of mind thing? I can't even write about it in a way that's compelling to me. And then you said, well, think about it, Vanessa. Like, it's all your human experiences. And then you said a few other wise things, and I went back and I thought about it, and I was like, oh my gosh. And it was like this epiphany for you. I'm like, that's right. You can't actually have any human experiences if you don't see them through the lens of others. Like, you know, how do you know that somebody's, you know, what fun is it of having a conversation if you don't really believe that that person is engaging with you? Like, you know, the whole intimacy of falling in love is of somebody who is knowing that they love you back, and even hating people. Like, what's the point of hating someone if you don't think and feel about their betrayal? It was just like boom, and I was like, oh my gosh, Mike is so right. And I think I came home and I was like, Brian, I don't know why you never explained it to me like this before. But it really was. I was like, oh, if I can take that and, you know, write something about the human experience in a way that's true, then that would be something that feels worthwhile. And it made it easier from then on. Mike, you're like a marriage therapist. You didn't even know it. Like, the only reason why we got through that book was because of you. Anything to add?
I'm also curious a little about the nuts and bolts. Like, do you ever sit at the computer and write sentences together? I couldn't do that. I can go back and forth.
Tell Mike about the process.
Well, what I remember, I mean, the fun part was, you know, it's just like when you've told me about writing books, it's really hard to figure out the structure and like what actually is going to be in the book and how's it going to be organized. And that was really fun and challenging and hard. And that was a lot of conversations and finding new papers and, oh my gosh, if this new paper, then that means this changes that whole idea. And oh my gosh, you know, one of the other fun parts was just realizing how some things that would seem irrelevant to each other were really linked together. You know, why would dog research be related to an argument about, you know, dehumanization? And so why would that even be in the same book? And so that was sort of a lot of fun, the creative part of, you know, all these crazy ideas and talking about it. Is that nuts? Does that make sense? And but then the actual writing, it would be, you know, I would write a draft of a chapter or a part of a chapter. She would write a draft of a chapter. It's a normal thing. We'd go back and forth. But in the end, what happened was, especially for this book, it wasn't as much when we wrote the dog book. Because that one we kind of wrote chapters that we felt there were things that like it just made sense that I drafted or she drafted because we had concentrated on the research in those areas, but we kind of split the work. But for this book, what ended up happening was exactly what you said. It was super inefficient to do that because I kept science-ifying it, making it terrible but correct. And then she kept storyifying it, and everyone would want to read it. but I was terrified as a scientist. And so we literally had to project it on the wall and slug through sentence by sentence. Can you really say, can you say it that way?
Okay, now I get it, Vanessa. Never again. Okay, now I get it.
All 120,000 words, one by one. And in the end, the book was 50,000 words. So that just tells you what happened.
Well, that was what drew it out. It was that was another part of the process.
All right. Well, let's turn to the content of the book then. So I'm actually not exactly sure exactly how much time we have before the Q&A, but
I think we have till 6:10, like 20 minutes.
Some of the people have read the book and some have not. So I'm interested in just giving us the general outline. But in addition, David said he would like to pull out some implications for modern society and whatnot. And I know you all have some ideas about political things and whatnot. So yeah, we have about 20 minutes, but let's spend it on the book then. And I guess tell me the general idea of the book. I know it's got many parts that have to come together, and so I don't know how to cue you to do it in the best but most efficient way. But just tell us the general thesis of the book, and let's start with that.
So the title is Survival of the Friendliest, and we called it that because, you know, there's this popular misconception that actually it's the strongest and the toughest and the meanest who are going to do well. And of course, that's the phrase survival of the fittest that we
that's the evolutionary
that's the evolution. Yes, but Darwin never meant that when he spoke about the survival of the fittest. He didn't come up with it, but he adopted it and used it. But fitness is really only our ability to reproduce. Like, it was never meant to go beyond that. So friendliest is actually an amazing survival strategy. It's really adaptive. We see it all the time in nature. And in terms of like helping your reproductive fitness, like friendliness is a much better strategy. Want to add on to that?
Yeah, just again, the idea is that I think in popular culture, the idea of survival of the fittest has been misconstrued to suggest that they're individuals or groups of humans who actually are more valuable or somehow superior to other groups of people. And that's, of course, not what it means at all, as Vanessa just said. And so we wanted to sort of push back on that misunderstanding by talking about survival of the friendliest, which actually, when you step back and you look at life and you ask the question, organisms, groups of organisms that are super successful, what is one of the key ingredients to their success? Well, it's almost always a new form of friendliness that launches a new type of cooperation. So you could look at flowering plants. They evolve very late in evolution. They make a deal with animals. They're going to provide a meal, and you're going to provide transport for reproductive information. They spread all over the world, and now they're the dominant type of plant. It's a type of friendliness, a new form of cooperation. You can then take dogs, which I like to use as Exhibit A, and we spend a lot of time in the book talking about, or bonobos as another non-human example of a species where there's a new type of friendliness, and that new type of friendliness leads to new types of cooperation. And because of that, those species succeed, especially in the case of dogs, far beyond what you would imagine. But let me just quantify that quickly. So wolves, sadly, are endangered everywhere they're found in the wild now. There's over 100 million dogs on the planet. Most successful mammal besides ourselves. Maybe more successful if you ask them. Bonobos, they have a new form of friendliness we can talk about. A lot of people always say to me, because bonobos don't have alpha males, while chimpanzees do, and chimpanzees have a lot of aggression, including lethal aggression. A lot of people say, oh, the poor bonobos, they wouldn't have a chance against chimpanzees. But the reality is that when people have gone out and measured the fitness, the reproductive success of male bonobos and compared them to male chimpanzees, the most successful male bonobo has more offspring than the most successful alpha chimpanzee male. And there's lots of interesting reasons for why that is, but it is not the case that friendliness somehow isn't a fitness advantage. In fact, you see over and over and over again that friendliness pays huge dividends. And when I'm talking about friendliness, I'm talking about something as simple as having fear replaced by attraction. So one concrete example of that is cleaner wrasse. Cleaner wrasse are these fish that swim inside the mouths of predatory fish and clean their mouths. So those fish are swimming into the mouths of predators. So their fear of the predator has been replaced with an attraction. They are attracted to the mouth that will eat them. They go in and they get a meal, okay? So that would be a type of friendliness. And we know that the fish they clean and these cleaner wrasse have amazing cooperative abilities. That cooperation could never be born. It could never exist if it wasn't first for the friendliness that allowed those fish to be attracted to the parasites in the mouths of the predatory fish. So I think that the story of humans, and Vanessa and I argue in the book that there's something really interesting about our own species where we have a new type of friendliness that puts us in a sort of a new adaptive space.
How do our friendly dogs and puppies fit into the picture? Because that's, you know, that's, if you compare dogs to, they're about the friendliest animal around, most people would say. How do they fit into the picture?
You can do dogs.
You want, okay.
Your thing.
Okay. Okay. You could do humans, I guess. Okay. So,
yeah, we'll come to humans in a minute. But
so the evolutionary story for dogs, the argument is that traditionally people had this idea that, you know, dogs were recreated in the image of humans, that we decided, some people decided, hey, wouldn't it be fun to grab some wolf puppies? They're so cute. We'll bring them home and breed them. And, oh, we have dogs. Boy, we're smarter than we thought. And so I don't think that's what happened. And here's why we know it's not, is because when genomic comparisons allowed for an estimate of when dog evolution began, the date is 15 to 25,000 years ago. That's before the first seed had been sown in the ground. There was no agriculture. So it means that it was hunting, gathering, or foraging humans that led in their interactions with wolves to the domestication of dogs. So that then sets up this possibility that it actually is natural selection, and it was wolves being attracted to humans and human settlements and humans becoming super predators, creating all this extra waste that they could take advantage of. And then if you add on top of that, there's some nice experiments that show that when you select animals to be friendly, you end up with a whole bunch of changes that we typically associate with domestication, like changes in their body, what they look like, their physiology, the skull shape, and even, you know, we've done our best to try to measure their cognition and their cooperative and communicative abilities. So we think there was selection for friendliness. It occurred through natural selection on a population of wolves as they interacted with foraging humans. And then that created the niche and the pressure that drove all the changes that we would normally recognize in dogs. And it's because the friendliest wolves had a big advantage.
Great. And Vanessa, Suzanne said at the very beginning that you'll also point to the dark side, particularly in the case of humans. So you want to give us a little picture of what's the flip side of cooperation with particular reference to humans?
Right. So I wanted to add on to something that Brian said at the beginning as well that's relevant to that. And it's this, so survival of the fittest as a concept has led to extraordinary real world harm. And that ties in to the dark side of human nature and what we're talking about. So one of the difficulties of this book, it was extremely complicated, like everything was connected.
Yeah.
But the man who coined survival of the fittest was actually a science communicator like me, Herbert Spencer. He was, I mean, he was also a scientist, but he was very quick with a turn of the word and a turn of the phrase. And so he was the one that came up with survival of the fittest.
He's supposed to be the father of social Darwinism, which really caused a lot of problems.
It did. And so this concept of survival of the fittest has been used everywhere, from like corporate restructuring to economic policy. And then, you know, as you hinted, yes, eugenics. I mean, eugenics is
yes.
huge in the US. The eugenics, you know, for everyone out there, eugenics was basically the idea of domestication. And what Brian was sort of like skirting around with all the animal work is the theory of human self-domestication, that humans, like domesticated animals, had fear replaced with attraction for one another. You know, and this is new. It's like your work and Brian's work and a whole bunch of colleagues, but it's actually a very old idea. And people have been noticing the similarities between humans and domesticated animals for you know, over a century. And it was the basis of the eugenics movement. It was actually the US sterilization program, which is based on eugenics, because eugenics was the idea that just like domesticated animals, you could choose who was going to reproduce. And then, you know, you got all these amazing changes. And so
it was actually considered a progressive movement at the time. It was progressive because we're improving the human.
Right. It was just once that connection between domestication, selective breeding, and humans got made, then the genie was just out of the bottle. And it made so much sense that you should be able to, just like you could breed a dog or a fox or a pigeon, that, you know, you should be able to take humans then and breed the kind of human that you want. And that ties into, you know, the survival of the fittest, because, you know, who are the two individuals that you're going to want? Well, you know, some people inherently believe that there are other groups that are superior to others. And so it was the blueprint for the Nazi genocide of all sorts of groups of people. It's been probably the basis for any genocide in the last 200 years. This idea that you want to create the humans that you want, but then of course, who are these humans? Who are these kind of inferior beings? And that's when, you know, that's when catastrophe happened. Did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to riff off what Mike was saying, that it was a progressive thing, because I think in doing the research for that part of the book, which actually most of it got cut out of the book, one of the big surprises for me was it always, when you hear about eugenics, it's always taught as like this horrible, morally repugnant thing and how silly people were. But when you read the original papers, and we went back and read some of the first 3 or 4 papers sort of proposing the creation of societies and how this could really be progressive, it was terrifying, because you realize that it was all done with such you know, good intent. It was not something that people, it's not like they were, you know, dark, evil, sinister people in back rooms plotting, and it really spun out of control. So it was clear there was a slippery slope, and that made it was nerve-wracking to see that.
But on the more sort of everyday level, it's also true that you guys make a connection between humans' friendliness to one another, but at the same time, they're maybe less than friendly attitude toward people that are not in their social network,
right?
Group, right.
So our attempt to communicate this and is the mama bear hypothesis, and the idea is that humans have I think a unique type of friendliness. While bonobos and chimpanzees recognize one another based on familiarity, they have an opposite reaction to individuals they're unfamiliar with. Bonobos have a positive response generally. Chimpanzees have a negative response generally. Humans, we also base our response to strangers based on familiarity, but we have an added thing, and that is some marker of group identity. If we have a dialect, or a way we dress, or a way we decorate ourselves, or something we eat, or you know, it could be the way we wear our clothes, or anything. Today it would be sports team you root for, or whatever. Instantly, a stranger you've never met before in your entire life can be a friend. It can, in the case of being an academic, it'd be the major you're in, or an interest, or whatever. We have this ability to quickly form these tight friendships within moments of realizing there's some group membership we share. But on the flip side of that, and what you're getting to, just like a mama bear who loves its cubs and is so nurturing and wonderful, I think we do that with our extended group family. We love them almost, our group identity and members like a family. But when they're threatened, and if they're threatened by others who have a different identity, just like a mama bear, we then want to protect our cubs. And you don't want to be in the way of a mama bear and her cubs. She becomes very violent. And so I think the same thing, this group identity that allows for an expanded human group and expanded cooperative partnerships it also can switch off towards others who we don't recognize like us or threaten our group. And that's what sets up this dehumanization, which then is basically you morally erasing or denying the need for concern for other human beings. You don't see them as fully human. They don't need to be treated as if they were fully human. And we try to make the case in the book that the best evidence suggests that that really is the psychological mechanism that allows for the ultimate, most horrific, scariest forms of human aggression and torture and violence.
So I think in the context of this series, it's, you know, friendship it's just universally seen as a good thing. We should all be friends. We should make these different connections. Like, we should be friends. But I think the important thing is to look at what cost. And so the friendships you form and the groups you form, what then are your other regarding perspectives? And are your friendships formed at a cost of someone or another group of people?
But it does seem like this is a dimension that is going across the world politics today, that the more nationalistic type thinking, people who think more nationalistically, which seems to be more widespread than it used to be not so many years ago, are thinking, why should I be friends with people outside my group? You cosmopolitan elites and whatnot, you think everybody should hold hands and sing kumbaya, but I don't like those people over there, and I just want to be friends in my group, and I don't want to be friends with those other people. So
my response to that would be that dehumanization is universal, and so even cosmopolitan elites can dehumanize. And the number one way to have a group of people dehumanize another group is have them feel like they're being dehumanized. They don't actually have to be dehumanized by the other group, but if they perceive they're being dehumanized, they then reciprocate that perceived dehumanization with actual dehumanization. So the idea of humanizing other groups is, you know, a win-win for everybody involved, because you don't want two groups of people not viewing each other as fully human and not having moral regard for one another, because that's when all the worst things happen.
And if I can just add to that too, the you know, bourgeois elite who are also capable of dehumanizing, I would say it's not a good strategy. And, you know, it's just like this concept of survival of the fittest. It's like friendliness is a much better strategy. When you have cooperation, as you know, Mike, you've said many times, that's when you get innovation. That's when you can connect all these different minds together and make progress. So, you know,
and the last point is, it's not to suggest that friendliness isn't selfish. We're not suggesting that it could be altruistic, but it doesn't have to be. It can be mutualistic too. And so we would be remiss if we didn't say that the number one thing we discovered in all of our research that really, I think, Duke has embraced and done a great job with is fostering cross-group friendships. It is, were you going to ask that? Sorry.
Well, I was gonna ask for a concrete example that you used one in something else that I was on with you, where about the way that legislators work together, or nowadays don't work together, that they don't have the cafeteria in Washington anymore where the Republicans and Democrats can sit down together. And this kind of mundane, everyday friendliness makes it easier to just shout at one another instead of having a conversation. And you mentioned something about somebody you met in the legislative aides in North Carolina legislature or something. Just tell, that'll be about the end. If you'll tell that story and how it relates to a very concrete recommendation for improving our political climate.
Sure. So the first point is that if you were to ask me, how would you increase humanization and decrease dehumanization?
But I just want to say a premise. Can I interrupt you for 1 second? All right. So I just also wanted to say that sometimes things feel bad and they're not actually that bad. Right now with the political situation, it definitely is that bad. I mean, we are more polarized now than we have been at any time since the Civil War. And so the disconnect between, you know, the parties in Washington are a real and serious concern. And there's lots of ways that this had happened. Yeah. And so it is very necessary to form those friendships.
Yeah.
So just if you were going to humanize one another, the most important thing is cross-group friendships. Friendships across whatever group is dehumanizing each other. There's nice evidence. And in fact, Sarah Gaither at Duke is doing work in this direction, and one of the leaders in the space. Ashley Jardina in political science is another person at Duke working on this. And again, what you see is cross-group friendships across history, across different studies. It really does immunize against the worst types of dehumanization. So the solution, Mike, in the story is, I have a former thesis student, Sandeep Prasanna. He graduated from Duke 2009, somewhere in there. And he went on to law school and then become a congressional staffer. And I went to visit him in the Hart Building, which is the Russell and the Hart Building, are where all of the staff for Congress is. And these are all very poorly paid 20-something-year-olds who are working their, tails off to make democracy happen. You never hear about them. And I asked him, I said, have you ever been to lunch with a Republican? Because he was a staffer for a Democratic senator. And he said, what? Why would I do that? And I said, well, look, here's my deal. Take a couple of copies of my book. I know in Senator Tillis's office, I know they're big dog fans. Go find the guy who does your job and ask him out to lunch. Give him a copy of the book, give it, and send one to Senator Tillis, and just see what happens. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I told him why, because of cross-group friendships. And he was like, okay, all right, I'll do it. I didn't hear from him for 6 months. And eventually he wrote me and he says, you're not going to believe what happened. I actually did it. I went out to lunch with a guy. He went to Carolina. His family is from the same place my family's from. We've become big friends. We're actually writing a bill together. And our friends are hanging out and da-da-da-da. So number one thing I would do is I would have congressional staffers have lunch together.
Well, but there used to be a lunchroom where the members of Congress had lunch together, which somehow has gone by the wayside as well. So, and you hear some of the older members of Congress saying in the old days, we used to, everybody would live in Washington and we would have parties together on the weekend and do things together and play golf together or whatever. But now everybody goes home and campaigns on the weekend, and so they don't see each other. So I really do think that if they were more on this friendliness dimension, it might help the politics as well. So I think in terms of, I think we're supposed to go to a question and answer at about this point. I think that's right. Suzanne or Aaron can correct me if I'm wrong. Aaron fed me one question to start with here in the chat, and then she's going to give me some more in a minute, I think. But basically, how does all this friendliness thing apply in the current situation where we've got all this social distancing? Is that going to make a difference to?
You want to do it, or you want me?
Yeah, I can do it.
Our operation and everything else.
It's hard. It's definitely hard because this pandemic is a time where it would be great to get everyone together. But I would say that there is a way of maintaining relationships that helps you align with social distancing. You can call people. Brian and I fell in love over the telephone, you guys. You guys have got FaceTime. It's like we're in the room together.
Yeah.
So you can reach out to people. You can make connections that way. Up and coming with this election, you can get involved. You can form friendships that way. I mean, it is never impossible to make and maintain friendships, regardless of pandemic.
I would just say it was unfortunate the term was social distancing. I wish it had been physical distancing.
My psychology colleague said relating at a distance would be a better term.
Relating at a distance, yeah.
Yes.
So unfortunately, that term got sucked up into the zeitgeist early on, and the goal is to be physically distant, not socially or psychologically.
Right. Another question, which is to the theoretical connection between cooperation and its dark side. One of the participants has asked, if the best and the worst of humanity come from the same mechanisms, how can we prevent the dark side of friendship from getting even darker as we become friendlier? How can we continue to benefit from friendship without falling victim to pitfalls? Is there Is there some way of decoupling them?
Well, I would just say again that just to be aware of the cost of the friendships that you have. And then, you know, as Brian said, the easiest way to short circuit dehumanization is to make friends with someone who is from the other group. So, I mean, friendships that are nascent that you just started, you could strengthen. You could be aware about dehumanizing thoughts or feelings that you had. So I think understanding the mechanism is probably the first step. I mean, unless you understand what's actually happening, it's difficult to find a solution.
But what about, I mean, one of the things that characterizes an in-group is that we share certain values, for example, and then we see these other people who don't seem to share these values that we consider, in some cases, religious values, so we consider them sacred, or maybe political commitments or social commitments that we consider, you know, just basic. And then there are these other people who don't share the values. How do we somehow not either dehumanize or you know, somehow turn it into a negative?
Well, I would say that even Jesus could sit down and talk to people of different religions. And I think, you know, that's the wonderful thing about the New Testament is that that's what Jesus did all the time. He was always forming cross-group friendships.
Yeah,
and that, yeah, and that, you know, just like in a marriage, just because you argue, I think the main thing is to remember that you're not arguing to be right. You're arguing to make progress. And I think that if everybody reflects on this situation, we have family members who are completely different in terms of their religious beliefs, in terms of their political beliefs. And, you know, I'm not saying that it's not difficult, but you can have friends who don't agree with everything you say. And those friends are the most precious ones of all, because they help you understand that it's not about being right. And, you know, the whole theory of mind is so important because, you know, you can imagine what it is like to be them in the situation that they've come from and the circumstances, and then see how that perspective.
Yeah, I just got another question which follows up on that. It says, but how can you do that when the disagreement is over fundamental human rights? If somebody, how can you be friends? How could you guys be friends with somebody who was a racist who thought that, you know, that slavery was a good thing or something? Could you be friends with them? And would you want to? And would it be a good thing to be friends with them?
So what I would first say is you can argue, you can disagree, you can have all sorts of, even a fight or repeated fights with your rival, even with your enemy, but you can't dehumanize them. That's the part that's off limits, because when you go there, that's where violence comes from.
Is that a voluntary judgment, dehumanization, or is it sometimes a kind of an involuntary, you know, that you just see them that way and it's not something you have control over?
That I don't know. I think we don't know that. That was one of the big surprises of the book was the first paper on dehumanization published by Albert Bandura in the mid-70s. Almost the year after Milgram publishes the monograph on obedience to authority. Obedience to authority has been taught in every class, cited, you know, 20 times more by scientists. And Albert Bandura's amazing paper, it hasn't even been, there's been no attempt to even replicate it. And so it's one of the fundamental classic studies in psychology. Nobody's even heard of it. It's not till the last 10 years that people have really developed techniques and methods. You know, as a developmentalist, there's currently one publication maybe on dehumanization in children. So I think your point's a really, really good one. And I would be remiss to say that I knew. But I do think what we do know is that when people are arguing and fighting between groups, if that slips into dehumanization, that's when you've got to do something where you say, hey, whoa, we're all human, we can do better than this. Whatever we're disagreeing with, it's not worth going there, because the human rights you care about, you can't care about human rights and allow yourself to dehumanize.
And then I would also add, so one of the great examples is from Durham. It was between one of these amazing friendships is Anne Atwater, who was a civil rights activist in Durham, and C.P. Ellis, who was the grand cyclops of the KKK. And they were thrown together and had to work together to try and deal with, you know, the struggle of segregation in the schools. And by the end of it, they were amazing friends at a cost to C.P. Ellis and at a cost to Ann Atwater, because everybody had the same questions. How can you even tolerate someone who has views that are so disgusting to us? But I would say that those friendships are actually the most valuable ones of all. And there's lots of examples of de-radicalization of people who had experienced a kind word or tolerance from someone who was just there to engage and help them explore their beliefs. So, I mean, you know, I don't think we have an answer, but it's definitely not to isolate and dehumanize and shame those people.
All right, so this might be relevant. The next question is, how do you differentiate between friendliness and friendship? Because it does seem to me that if there's somebody that you had a lot of fundamental differences in really fundamental values with, you might not necessarily have to be friends, in like as in this exceptional case you just said, but you at least need to be friendly. If not friends, it's not friends.
I think it's always a good idea to be kind.
Yeah, I think.
But differentiating between those two, it is true. I mean, survival of the friendliest, it's not survival of friendship. So when the cleaner rat swims into the predatory fish to get food out of its mouth, I'm not suggesting they're friends. I'm suggesting there's a new type of friendliness that allows for a new level of cooperation. So yeah, the idea is you want to be friendly, that sets up the opportunity for cooperation, and maybe then friendship.
Because I would say that, you know, nobody's obligated to be friends with someone else, but friendship, like true friendship, is actually the most powerful tool that anyone has ever found in all these, you know, dehumanizations, anti-prejudice studies. It's always the true friendships and the meaningful friendships that lead to positive change.
Again, a question fed to me here from the participants is, in conversations past, we have heard about how friendships cannot be static. What do you, they always have to be evolving. And so it says, how do you believe your collaboration has moved yourselves in new, good directions?
Wow.
Well, I mean, we started out doing science together, and now we write together. So
All right.
now
Together,
the
we've got
kids
the
together.
dog together.
Now we're raising puppies together. I don't know. We're always doing something new together.
All right,
And
good.
it's work. Let me tell you, it is work. And I think, I think the most important lesson I've learned is about the arguing. It's important to argue, but to understand why you're arguing. And then I think just it's just situational. I mean, you're with someone all the time, then, or if you have, like the Duke students, if you have a chance to interact and be together in that space, then that's an opportunity for you to have a meaningful connection.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things points that Walter Senator Armstrong makes in his book, and I think it's also made by a German philosopher, Habermas, who I follow a little bit, is that just the fact of engaging with someone in a conversation implicitly communicates respect, that I'm taking your opinion seriously, even if I disagree with it. Whereas if I really am, you know, dehumanizing and writing you off, then I just say, oh yeah, okay, and I move on, and I don't engage. Yeah, I think that's a key point. Do you think that researchers who don't invest in their friendship produce distinctly different questions and research outcomes than collaborators like you guys? In other words, does collaboration produce better research in science than maybe people who go it alone a little more?
Well, Mike, you and Brian should answer that question together. What do you guys think?
Yes.
Yes. No, I mean, you know, science is one of is the model for how nobody can do anything alone that's very worthwhile. That nowadays there's almost no science, good science that's produced by individuals. It's all collaborative.
Yeah, and there's nice demonstrations of that. And then a shout out to you, Mike, to connect with some more social science type work about interdependence. That one of the ways that you have friendships last and are created, where you might have had rivals, but then you can have them be creative together, is when individuals depend on each other to be successful. And so there's all sorts of nice examples, and this is sort of also relevant to the previous conversation or the last question, is when there's interdependence, where you can't succeed without the other person or other side. That tends to also lift up relationships. And in science, I don't think it's any different. How many times have I heard you talk about what is a collaboration in science? It's like, well, both sides need to bring something to the table. Then you have interdependence. That's the great relationship.
Yeah, actually, if I can interject something here, is that really going all the way back to Durkheim, but also to current social psychology, there are really two basic mechanisms for bonding. One of them is working together, collaborating, and it brings us together, having a shared goal, working toward the same end, etc. Like your friends, the C.P. Lewis and whoever, working toward the same goal. And the other one, which now gets us a little more to the dark side, is similarity. And this is the in-group strangers and stuff, like you were saying. If you meet a fan of your sports team, you automatically relate to them. So, but the similarity mechanism needs exposure, which you'll talk about in your book. You need to hang out with people and see that they have the same concerns you do, and their kid is a brat just like your kid is a brat, and they deal with it the same way you do, and so forth. So just mere exposure, as it were, I think brings to the fore that we're more similar down deep than our surface appearance would tell us. So both of those are things that I think we could work on more, is getting people to collaborate and be interdependent more across groups, but also just to be exposed to one another more, so that you see that, down deep we're all really the same.
And to riff quickly off that is to say that there's lots of evidence now from social media that in social media, it exaggerates people's perception of other groups being different. And that actually, when you show people how the other group thinks about you in reality, people realize, oh my gosh, I thought they thought I was horrible, but now that I see how they really perceive me, we're not that different after all. And so
I think, social media really, I think, is your theoretical picture captures a really important dimension of it, which is, I've seen people that say things on email and I don't do social media, so I don't know about that, but I assume it's true on social media as well, that they would never say to your face in a million years, because we have these evolved friendliness mechanisms for, if not just, being aggressive to people toward their face. But I can type an email and I don't have to view them in the face, or I can post something on, I just hit retweet or whatever, and I don't have to think about the consequences at all. That seems to me is something, I don't know the answer to it, but it's something that the people who are thinking about social media should really somehow try to think about ways of getting the friendliness, the face-to-face component into it more.
And I agree with you, Mike. I think that social media is like all technology. It is just an extension of human nature. And so it can be used for really wonderful things, for the wonderful side of friendship. Let's see, Megan Phelps Roper was a radical, like a white supremacist radical, who was turned by a kind interaction on Twitter. And then on the other side, we also see people really forming these in-groups, and the kind of the dark side of friendship is to use those in-groups to attack and dehumanize and strengthen those relationships.
No, it's really a puzzle, because one of the things that makes friendships is sharing. So when you post your kids' pictures on Facebook or whatever, you're trying to deepen your relationships with people, but yet at the same time, many people are capable of saying things on email or Facebook that they would never say to somebody's face. So it's a different way of, the medium matters, and it's something that we need to know more about scientifically.
And I think that there is nothing that replaces a face-to-face interaction, not even a telephone. So that, and I am concerned with the young people that we see. I mean, they are always on their phones, and it's very rare to see an extended interaction between two people. And when we were at college, we didn't have that at all.
Well, my teenage son, I was worried that he wasn't going out with his friends like I used to go out with my friends all the time. And it turns out he's with his friends all night, every night, virtually, as they do their homework together and talk. So it's a different world, you know. We got in.
We're too old. We're too old for this. The revolution.
Okay, on that note, I've got a message that it's time to wrap up, and I want to thank you guys very much.
We want to thank you, Mike,
listening in. And
thank you to the audience,
everyone listening in, to please join us, not exactly us, but join somebody next Thursday for the next Reimagining the World Together, for a conversation between Shane Battier. Okay, so we get some serious star power.
We were like the warm-up, the intro, except for you, Mike.
Between Shane Battier and Ravi Gupta. And it is, okay, so that's it. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.
Thank you, Keenan.
Bye.